Welcome to Sissy Graham's Spicy Story channel. If you like my voice, then hit the like button and do subscribe our channel for regular updates. Today I come up with whole new content of story. So, now let's start the story. It was a typical Friday evening. I had just returned home from a long, exhausting day at work. The house was quiet, eerily so, with only the faint hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. My servant, Alina, had been working for us for a couple of years. She was efficient, dependable, and always kept the house immaculate. But tonight, something felt different. I remembered the first time Alina started working for us, soft-spoken, respectful, and never one to overstep her boundaries. Over the months, however, subtle shifts in her behavior caught my attention. Lingering glances, brushes of her fingers against mine when handing something over, small moments I dismissed as harmless. Perhaps it was all in my head. After all, she was simply doing her job, or so I convinced myself. That evening, I was home alone. My partner was out of town on business, and I was looking forward to a quiet night in. Tossing my jacket onto the couch and kicking off my shoes, I headed to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of cold water. As I stood by the counter, savoring the momentary calm, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Turning around, I found Alina standing there, just a few feet away, her eyes locked on mine. Her gaze was different, bold, almost unflinching. My heart skipped a beat. "You're still here?" I asked, surprised she hadn't left for the day. "I thought you might need some help tonight," she said, her voice smooth and steady. Her response caught me off guard. It wasn't unusual for her to stay late occasionally, but there was something about her tone, something unspoken, that made the air feel charged. I nodded, unsure of how to respond, and turned back to my glass of water. But I could feel her presence behind me, closer now. My skin tingled with awareness. The house felt smaller, the kitchen suddenly more intimate. Before I could break the silence, she stepped even closer, her breath warm against the back of my neck. I froze, startled by the gentle brush of her fingers grazing my arm. My heart pounded, a mix of confusion and unease flooding my senses. What was happening? This wasn't like her. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my mind was blank. Finally, I managed to ask, "Is there something I can get you?" My voice trembled slightly. Alina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped even closer, her body almost pressed against mine. The heat between us was palpable. "I think there's something you want," she whispered, her voice low and suggestive. I felt my breath catch. This was wrong, wasn't it? She was my servant, someone I trusted to maintain professionalism. But the intensity in her dark, smoldering eyes made it impossible to think straight. The tension in the room was suffocating, drawing me into her, into this moment. Her hand reached up, her fingers brushing against my face in a light, teasing caress. My skin burned under her touch, and despite the voice in my head screaming at me to stop, I found myself leaning into her hand. Her lips curled into a knowing smile, as if she could sense the turmoil raging inside me. "You don't have to pretend," she murmured, her fingers tracing along my jaw. "I've seen the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." Her words jolted me. Had I been that obvious? All those stolen glances, those fleeting moments of admiration I thought were harmless, had she noticed them all? My thoughts spiraled, but before I could respond, she leaned in, her lips brushing lightly against mine in an electrifying kiss. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. My heart raced, my mind screamed that this was a mistake, but my body betrayed me. Against all logic, I found myself kissing her back, hesitant at first, then with growing urgency as the tension that had been simmering between us finally erupted. Her hands moved to my chest, gently pushing me back against the counter as the kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more demanding. The line between right and wrong blurred, drowned out by the heat of the moment. Alina's body pressed against mine, her touch both thrilling and terrifying. I knew this was a boundary I shouldn't cross, but in that instant, it was impossible to care about consequences. She pulled back slightly, her breath shallow, her eyes locking onto mine with a mix of satisfaction and challenge. "Tell me you don't want this," she whispered, her voice husky. I opened my mouth to protest, to deny her words, but nothing came out. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't resist her. My silence seemed to answer her question, and she took my hand, leading me toward the living room. Her grip was firm, insistent, and I couldn't bring myself to stop her. We collapsed onto the couch, the world outside fading away. There was only Alina and me, the soft rustle of fabric, the warmth of her skin, the way her lips found mine over and over again. Each kiss felt forbidden, dangerous, yet impossibly intoxicating. Every rational thought was drowned out by the intensity of the moment, leaving only raw emotion in its wake. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Alina pulled back, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her expression was calm, composed, as though nothing had happened, as though she hadn't just turned my world upside down. She stood, smoothing her clothes, and spoke softly, "I'll be leaving now." I watched her walk to the door, still too stunned to respond. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, racing with questions and guilt. What had just happened? Wow. What was I supposed to do now? Before stepping out, she turned back to me, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Think about what you want," she said, her tone both an invitation and a warning. "I'll be back tomorrow." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet house. The weight of what had just happened hit me like a wave. Guilt crashing down over me, we had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, and there was no going back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I replayed the events over and over in my mind, the way her lips felt, the way her body moved against mine. I knew it was wrong, but the memory of it was impossible to shake. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would things return to normal, or had we set something in motion that couldn't be undone? The next day, Alina returned, just as she had promised. She went about her duties as if nothing had happened, but every time our eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding between us. We had crossed a boundary, and there was no turning back. Days turned into weeks, and our encounters became more frequent, more intense. The thrill of secrecy and the allure of her attention consumed me, even as the weight of guilt grew heavier. I knew we were playing with fire, and that sooner or later, the consequences would catch up to us. But in the heat of the moment, none of that seemed to matter. For now, all that mattered was her, the way she looked at me with those dark, knowing eyes, and the way she made me feel alive. But deep down, I knew this couldn't last forever, and when the end came, it would be just as explosive as the passion that had brought us together. This is where the story wraps up. Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll talk to you soon. See you next time.